All right, Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. It's now Tuesday, the 27th of October, 2020. I'm going to talk today again about Virginia Military Institute because the accusations of racism there, which I believe are totally false, have resulted in the superintendent resigning, a four-star general named Benson P. III. Had been there, I think, since 2003, so that would be 17 years as superintendent. During the summer, as I pointed out before, he indicated they won't change, he did not want to change any of the names of the buildings at the school, and he did not want to take down any of the Confederate statues. There aren't that many, but most notably Stonewall Jackson, and also the memorial centrally located for the cadets, the VMI cadets that were killed at the Battle of Newmarket during the Civil War, when the cadets temporarily joined the Confederate Army to repel a northern invasion into the Shenandoah Valley. The commander of that, the Confederate commander of that force, of that army that fought at that battle at Newmarket, Virginia, was the former United States Vice President, John Breckinridge. His army was, the enemy, the Union Army, was about to make a breakthrough in his defensive line. And with great reluctance, he told the VMI cadets, there were about 250 of them. He told the commander of the cadets, he said, we're going to have to put you in. And so he spoke to his adjutant and he said, throw in the VMI cadets and may God forgive me. The age of the cadets ranged from 15 to 25. The typical age was 17 to 20. As I say, 10 of them were killed. The school, as I had mentioned before, was tax supported by the state of Virginia. So the cadets were loyal to their state. And in those days, in 1860, well, that happened in 1864, but in 1861, when the Civil War started, secession was not a settled matter as to whether it was legal or illegal. And the loyalty of most citizens, North and South, was often first to their state and secondarily to the central government. I had mentioned in earlier video episodes that the northeastern states 5 times between 1789 and 1848 threatened to secede themselves. Nonetheless, at this point, VMI needs our help. Somebody who's wiser than me and older once told me, there comes a time when you really can't defend yourself. When I watch the politicians, they do it all the time. And when somebody wants you is willing to listen to your explanation, you can defend yourself. But when you're in a situation like this, where the only people that can speak truth to power are your friends, and believe me, in this case, the power is not the traditional power. The power is the Washington Post and Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, and the Democrat Party. People who hate the United States of America and who hate Donald Trump. I don't want to be too quick to say they hate the United States of America, but let's put it this way. They endorse Barack Obama, who said that his prime objective upon becoming president the first time was to fundamentally transform America. Do you really want to fundamentally transform something you love? You want to tell your wife, well, I love you, but I need you to fundamentally transform. Or your husband, I love you, but I want you to fundamentally transform. Doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. Now, it happens because marriages, there's all kinds of marriages, and there's all kinds of stresses that come up in marriage and that sort of thing. But VMI needs our help. They need us to speak up for them because they're in a point now where nobody will believe them. The people in power will not believe them when they tell them there isn't any racism. So we need to do it. What I am going to do is I'm going to put a couple of links below here to a VMI graduate who has a YouTube channel. His first name is Andy. The second name that he uses is Andy Adapts, like Andy adapts to change. So I'm sure his last name is not Adapts, but in one of the videos, he spends about an hour and a half, and it can get, it can be a little too long, but it is much too long if you're not interested. But if you're interested, you'll want to stick with it because he spends an hour and a half discussing the first 6 months as what they call a RAP at the Virginia Military Institute. And that's the equivalent of a plebe or a knob. And he compared them to schools like the Citadel and West Point and the Naval Academy and all that sort of thing. I would recommend that. It's an hour and a half. So if you're really interested in what it's like at VMI, I would recommend that. And the other one is a shorter one. It's just under 40 minutes. Same guy, Andy. Now, Andy graduated from VMI in 2014, so he's pretty current. Andy is also a racial minority. He happens to be Asian. He made, in all that, 40 minutes plus an hour and a half, so that's over 2 hours that I've listened to watch him on YouTube. He didn't make one complaint about how he was treated as a racial minority at Virginia Military Institute. He said it was tough. He said there were times when he hated it. There were times when he hated what he called the cadre, which were the upperclassmen. There were times when he hated the activities that they had to do, but he never once complained about mistreatment as a minority. And the other thing is interesting. He did not have a Southern accent, though I do, by watching it, I got a kind of a hint that he was from Virginia because he said there were times when he was going through that rat line that he thought, well, I ought to just leave and go to UVA, which I assume meant University of Virginia. But here's what he said was the most important thing that he learned or anyone will learn when they go to a military school like VMI or Citadel or West Point or the others. And that is the importance of being part of a team. He said, he was an athletic in high school. He said, when I got to VMI, what I learned, it wasn't really important who scored the goal. What was important was that the team scored the goal. Now, that appears to me to be what's lacking by those who are making these complaints at VMI about racism. It's interesting. One of the complaints, and we don't know if it, well, I guess it really happened. But if you'll watch those videos by Andy, you'll see that there were times there, he actually had footage of it, of the upperclassmen screaming at the rats, screaming so loud, and he said you'd get spittle in your face from them screaming at you, and they're just screaming that, well, you've seen the movies about military boot camp. They're screaming at you and calling you the dumbest thing in the world. And okay, so they've got roughly 1,700 cadets, and apparently one time, one cadet, maybe more than one, but there's one time that's cited where one cadet said, "I'm going to lynch you and use your corpse for a punching bag." He could have said that to Andy, who's Asian, because the biggest lynching in the United States history happened in Los Angeles in 1873, when Ulysses Grant was president, when Reconstruction was in progress in the South. 19 victims in that Los Angeles lynching were all Asian. One of them happened to be a woman. In fact, if you look at California, between 1849 and 1902, 2/3 of the lynching victims or lynch victims were Asians, not black. So if whoever that upperclassman was that made that remark, and he was suspended for a year, had made that to Andy, do you think Andy would have complained? Well, I'll let you watch his videos and just judge for yourself to see if he would complain. Or if he would just take it in as part of the indoctrination, the military indoctrination. That can be seen both ways. It can be seen as, deliberately offensive, or it can be seen as something that just might as well have been said to Andy, the Asian guy. Now, to repeat, Andy has no Southern accent. He made no remarks during these videos I'm going to link to that indicated he had any interest in Confederate heritage anymore. He did mention the Battle of Newmarket and when about the forced march to Newmarket, but he didn't not much else dwell on the Confederate history of the VMI. He hardly mentioned it at all. In fact, the only thing I can recall him mentioning, I don't think he even mentioned Stonewall Jackson. I know he mentioned Newmarket, which was the battle that I had started off with. So let's look over some of the complaints. And I'm linking back now. The whole reason this came up is because General P announced in late July that he was not going to take down any of the statues. He was going to change some of the procedures or the routines, the drills that they did to de-emphasize the attachment to the Confederacy. But he wasn't going to take down that monument under which some of the boys that were killed at the Battle of Newmarket are buried. But he said, what we'll do in the future is we'll emphasize more the heroes of VMI during its second century. And you know who one of those heroes was? General George C. Marshall of the Marshall Plan. Probably the most respected American during World War II, second perhaps to Franklin Roosevelt, maybe second to Eisenhower. But I think Marshall had the better reputation. He's a VMI graduate. VMI has Nobel Prize winners as graduates, has Rhodes Scholars as graduates. Washington Post is just looking for anything they can find wrong and putting whatever spin is required to make it look bad. Yeah. So let's, it's 96% of the students at VMI are male. Before she became a Supreme Court justice, Ruth Ginsburg sued the school to require them to let women in. What is it now, 30, 40 years later, 4% of the class is women? There didn't have to be a lawsuit. Well, I don't know that for sure, but I know blacks came in. I know the 4% figure, and I know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg thing, but blacks were first introduced into the school in 1968. I think another good way to look at this, if you're familiar with the author Pat Conroy, The Great Santini, Prince of Tides, I think his best novel is The Lords of Discipline, which is about his time at the Citadel. It's a very similar story, but what's different is he tells it at a time when the Citadel was first letting blacks into the school. Yeah, that was tough and true. It's a novel. But there's a lot of truth in the novel, a lot of it. Citadel graduates, get to know some Citadel graduates and they'll tell you. He was persona non grata there for years, Conroy was, for exposing the resistance to black integration at the Citadel. But when you look at what the blacks went through when they first joined the Citadel compared to what these people are experiencing at VMI in the last few years, there's no comparison. None. They have nothing to complain about. They're complaining about microaggressions by comparison. It's disgusting. So why did I get started on that? Well, here's one reason why. Two of the black cadets last month refused to attend a speech by Vice President Pence. That's not permitted. That's not permitted when a prominent speaker comes to the school, or even any speaker to address the student body. That's not permitted. They had Ruth Ginsburg address the school after suing the school for being sexist, supposedly sexist, so that she could get women into the school. Can you imagine what would have happened to any cadet if he had refused to go listen to her speech because he objected to how she had changed the school? There's no excuse for not listening, going to the Pence. It's a show of respect. Whether you respect the man or not, he holds an office which is respected, and that's the way the school looks at it. That's the way West Point would look at it. That's the way the Naval Academy would look at it. Why do these two black guys at VMI feel that they should be an exception? Well, the Washington Post is there to cheer them on and to plead their case. Silly. Again, compare that to what the initial blacks went through at VMI to get there, or at the Citadel, or any of the others. Well, another one, it's apparently, I can't remember for sure, it's in the Washington Post article, but somebody had said that the early black cadets were, oh no, I know what it was. The two black cadets that would not attend the Pence speech. There's an anonymous app in which which cadets at the Institute can communicate with one another, but they're able to express their opinions anonymously. So one of them anonymously said, to the two black guys, if you don't want to be, if you don't want to play by the rules, if you don't want to play by the rules that everybody else here plays by, just leave the school. Interestingly, I would be interested to know if the Washington Post would criticize Abraham Lincoln for about less than a month, only weeks before, I think maybe 3 weeks before he announced the Emancipation Proclamation. He had a group of black leaders into the White House, and he told them, said, look, you and we are different. We cannot cohabitate. And it's really, I want to encourage you, among the leaders of your people, meaning the blacks, to get some of your people to volunteer to relocate to Nicaragua or Africa. Colonize your own people. This was Abraham Lincoln's approach. I don't see the Washington Post encouraging anyone to tear down the Lincoln Memorial. Oh yeah. Another problem is that the school, I don't know how long ago, I'm sure it's been years, probably decades, but they used to play Dixie, and that was racist. That's racist. Well, when it was announced that Robert E. Lee's army had surrendered at Appomattox in April of 1865, about a week before Lincoln was assassinated, the crowd came to the White House to serenade him. And then, of course, they asked for a speech. And he gave a brief speech. And then he wanted the music to return. They said, is there anything you want us to play? I said, yeah, I want you to play Dixie. I want our new citizen or rejoined citizens or something like that. I want our rejoined citizens to know that they can play it again. I want you to play Dixie. And it's a tune I've always liked. Well, I think I've covered a lot of what I want to cover. Oh yeah. Another microaggression. The Washington Post points out that one of the students was upset that on Lee Jackson Day, which is one day a year, celebrating their birthdays or commemorating their birthdays, visitors are permitted to put Confederate flags around Jackson's statue on that one day. Presumably they're taken down the next day. And obviously that's a microaggression that's intolerable to the current Black cadets there that are complaining. So obviously that's going to go. But what I think will happen is that this is a fantasy. This is a complete fantasy that America is fundamentally a racist country. There is no multicultural country anywhere close to our size that is less racist. Perhaps Canada, but they're not really close to our size except geographically. Blacks are hunger to get into this country because of the opportunity, because of the open society. I hope not because they expect to get preferential treatment through affirmative action or something like that. I don't know where I have lived long enough to know that I can't predict the culture. I don't know that anybody can. There are certain things you can predict if you're looking. I can remember when I was starting out in business and integrated circuits were coming on stream. You could look at an integrated circuit the way Bob Noyce designed it. You could say, as long as they continue to miniaturize that, which looks like it's entirely possible to do, we can continue to reduce the cost per function of electronic circuits. And gosh, someday we'll be talking to our computers like televisions. That was predictable. But changes in culture are much harder to predict. Well, let me try, okay? I think we may be living in a circumstance similar to 1918, when the amendment was passed. I don't remember the number that prohibited the recreational use of alcoholic beverages. Apparently there was a lot of self-righteousness. There was a lot of piety that somehow took control of our culture at that time. Maybe it had to do with entering World War I. Maybe it had to do with, abuse of alcohol beforehand. But this righteous attitude overtook our country, and we outlawed recreational use of alcohol. Well, of course, what happened it had to, just for a reminder, that amendment had to be not only get through Congress with a 2/3 majority, it had to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. That's not easy to do. That's one reason the Second Amendment is so strong, because those that oppose it realize it's going to be hard to repeal it. You have to get 3/4 of the states to do it. Well, anyway, 3/4 of the states ratified prohibition. I think it was 13 years later, was it? I think so. Maybe 14 years later, the amendment was repealed and stayed that way. Let's say it was 1933 or so. 67 plus 20 is 87 years, almost 90 years. It stayed repealed. I don't think there's any chance that it's going to, start up again, meaning prohibition. So maybe 13 years this madness lasted, this self-righteous madness that brought us prohibition lasted. You mean during the Roaring '20s, obviously, everybody with influence could circumvent it. And that's what happened. The wealthy people really weren't hurt by it. They went to speakeasies. What was it? Mayor Wagner of New York would come into the office at noon, typically, because he had been out at the speakeasies all night. Or was it Walker? Which one was it? I think it was Walker. And so the wealthy people could just ignore it. You know, they could get around it. But what it did is it created this, you know, this underworld beneath it, which was bad in and of itself. But the real killer was when the Depression hit. And everybody realized alcohol abuse is a problem. But it's not our biggest problem. Our biggest damn problem is that our country may be going bankrupt, that we may all be heading towards poverty. Maybe it's better to give people a way to lighten up, as long as they can control their alcohol consumption, like most people can, and repeal prohibition. So maybe, I hope it's not going to be the case, maybe what it will take is a collapse in our economy before those Black Lives Matter, people who take offense at microaggressions, people easily offended with jokes. Maybe it will take a collapse in our economy for them to realize that, you know, all those concerns I had were really secondary. If I had been a more self-reliant person, I could have ignored them and done better for myself. If I hadn't expected special treatment, such as reparations, then I could have made my own life more valuable, more profitable, more successful. So I hope it doesn't take a collapse in our economy. But that would be, that might be a preference to what we would otherwise get, which is a one-way ticket to disastrous socialism, communism. I never have been one for the Red Scare of looking for communists under my bed or anything like that, even when I was a young boy in the 50s and a teenager in the 60s. I mean, I thought that all that was kind of nonsense, the J. Edgar Hoover. But what we did learn is that there were some out there. And the McCarthy acts were not completely wrong. But I thought, you know, McCarthyism was bad. I mean, I believed, you know, what they did was obscene. I mean, ruining people's careers over attitudes, you know, stifling free speech. But in truth, what we're facing now is even worse, far worse. There's this feeling on college campuses that the instructors, the professors, are somehow morally superior, but they are just as defective as anyone else. In fact, in my opinion, more so, primarily because they are intolerant and they censor. Well, I've gone on enough. If you're interested in what I have to say, look at those videos below and learn what VMI is really like, learn what it and the other military schools have done to strengthen this country. And then finally, once again, I'd like to encourage you to look at my newest book, Causes of the Civil War. Get familiar with it. Learn the explanations and facts in here. I think it will help you defend Confederate monuments. Okay, that's our show for today, and thanks for watching.